Where's that coming from? It's picking up by that one.
This works.
Okay, it's time. Let's go ahead and get started. So,
John, you want to join us?
John. So, welcome. Please, we did not get a note taker or volunteer on the mail list. We need a note taker in order to begin.
Okay.
I
Let's
see.
try maybe someone who's got their laptop with them that can use the note-taking tool. I appreciate that greatly.
Let's say, I'll give you the notebook and a pen if that's where it takes.
So Sean did it last time. Please don't make Sean do it again. Because Sean knows all of you and where you live. We can sit here as long as they know. I'll do it. I'll point out that Robert is the chair. He's technically exempt from that.
Well, so thank you so much. Okay, note well, please pay attention to this. Please pay attention if you're going to contribute to your rights and your privileges and your responsibilities, mostly your responsibilities, if you're going to contribute. Please treat each other well, basically. Don't make us call the Ombudsman team. No, seriously, it's okay to disagree, but disagree in a way that is respectful to the person who had the idea you disagree with. Next slide. So everybody needs to log into Medico. This is how the blue sheets are tracked. And if you're remote, please make sure your audio and video are off unless you're trying to talk to the people here in the room. And headset really makes that work much better here in the room. Again, make sure you join to get the blue sheets. We obviously got a perfectly sized room this time. So I'm going to let Ben do the status.
So all of our adopted drafts are at least at working group last call at this point. We've got RCD is still in the working group. It's still in the RC editor queue. It still is misrefed on the SIPCORE call info draft, but that one's on the telechat, so it's coming pretty close. We also have two more on a May telechat, the out-of-band service provider out-of-band and the connected identity. Always have to stop and remember what that is from the name of it. And we have OCSP in AD evaluation. To reminder to the authors, it is in a revised ID needed state, and there is ORI does have a review out there. Good. And so short-lived is in working group last call. We have it on today's agenda as a placeholder in case we had something to discuss. We have not gotten any working group last call feedback yet, hint, hint. I ask, have the authors got any private feedback that should be discussed? And I assume, John, you haven't gotten any feedback on?
No, John
Okay.
Peterson here. I did want to say as well, I did talk to Ori about the OCSP stuff. It's pretty straightforward. We're going to do some minor kind of organizational things, maybe a couple points of clarification, but I'll try to bang that out this week, actually.
Awesome.
Okay, and then that will be a minor agenda bash. Since we don't have anything to talk about with short-lived, we're not going to talk about it. So then here is our agenda. We have a fair amount of stuff from Chris on certificates. We have the Vesper use cases, and if time permits, we'll talk about the caller ID verification draft. And so, Chris, you're up. And let me see, I gotta bring up your slides.
This works now.
Wait,
Because I
what?
didn't
No.
last time.
Oh, I've gotta close that. Okay, here we go. Whoa, no,
So
that wasn't it. There
Maybe
we go.
briefly on short-lived, just a note that we do reference it now in ADIS documents. So, so thumbs up for me for supporting that.
So please review it.
Yeah. Well, I reviewed it. It's good from my perspective. I guess that's what I'm saying. All right. So STICT. We have a new rev of the document. We've included some new examples in it. Tried to take some of the feedback.
Did you hit the clicker thing?
Maybe I have to do it again. Let's see. Yep, I have to do it again. Okay. I am no longer controlling the slides.
There we go. So as we've discussed before, I'll try not to do some repetitive stuff, but I did try to go a little more in depth than I've gone in the past on reviewing it to make sure folks understand the usage and the importance and things like that. But we do borrow from the 6962 certificate transparency approach, but we do have things that are specific to secure telephone identity. And so we want to keep the underpinnings, the Merkle trees, all of that stuff the same. It's just the usage is slightly different. As we noted before, the primary focus is to protect STI certificates in general, but focused on the use of, the different variations of TN auth list. So the use of service provider codes, which would be applicable to, at least in the US, the usage for the current shaken approach, making sure that there isn't any misissuance or CAs that are issuing SBC codes that they shouldn't be. And then also with delegate certificates that have telephone numbers associated with them. That's obviously critical for somebody that wants to try to issue a TN, a delegate certificate with a TN that they're not supposed to be as well. And then provide the transparency, provide the ability to monitor, etc. Things I'll go through. The good thing about, I've gotten feedback about the general complexity in the web TLS world, how, certificate transparency, I've gotten comments about being heavyweight and things like that. In the STIR world, at least, in the US deployment and I guess Canada as well, the participants is quite limited. There's a governance of that. You're let into the ecosystem. So, the scope is a lot smaller than domains in the web world. So that's why we think this has a lot of value for the intent of what certificate transparency was all about. But maybe not with all the complexity of implementation and a lot of participation and just scale in general.
Ecker's in the queue.
Ecker?
I guess I'm not following why you can't literally just use CT.
Why we can't literally use CT? Well, to a certain extent, we are, but is there something specific you're implying that we're doing that is incompatible or?
Why not use their logs is what he means.
Oh, use web PKI CT.
I mean, you have certificates.
Um,
Now you got a line.
Oh,
Because
am
what
I
you
up?
have here
Oh,
is you
yeah,
got
sorry.
pieces of it, you copied and pasted it. And that's like not great, right? As an operational matter. I'm going to fix that in a second.
Yeah.
I'd have to think about that one, but John, if you have any comments, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this comes down to what we think misissuance means, and so it's really the semantics by which this is being read that is different. I think you're quite correct, Echo, that technically, like, if all you're doing is just keeping track of this cert was issued, there's no reason you couldn't actually just use CT itself. It's just the entities that would be relying on it would be holding it up against a very different bar, especially for delegate certificates, right? Because I mean, basically SPC certificates, there is a centralized entity that is responsible for issuing these. There's a lot of paper trail, and the risks of misissuance are relatively low, or at least it's very, very easy to detect. Delegate certificates much more complicated.
Right.
And I am a little worried about this in terms of who is going to end up being the person that is going to make policy assessments about the validity of delegate certificates in this environment. But that's not our problem, in the sense of we're at the IETF, we don't really care why people trust each other or don't. So, I mean, I think your point's valid that you could literally just use CT for this. It's just that the relying parties on it would be looking at that data through a very different lens, I think, than the lens that is used in the web PKI.
I mean, of course, but CT takes no position on what
Yep.
a valid cert is, right?
Yep.
You just
It's just a ledger. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, and in fact, when you go see, you operate example.com and you see a certificate issue for example.com, you got to go do a bunch of stuff to find out whether or not actually someone in your organization had an issue or not. So I don't think that I agree if it were like KT, which had a bunch of weird structure in it, you might be different, but I just I don't understand why you can't literally just use CT and then write a document that says this is how, I mean, if you need to at all, it says this is how you assess whether something might have been misissued.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'll add to this, and this is something I've talked to Chris about in some detail, actually, is that, I think this is a foundational technology that would then be leveraged for us to do very different things on top of it potentially. And having this doesn't get us that much, I think, but there's things you could do once you have this that would get us more. And so yeah, much like your example of all the things you have to do with example.com to figure out what it would mean for that to be valid. I think there's actually a lot of data you would need to correlate with this in order for it actually to make a difference.
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, the roles of the monitors and auditors and those types of things are going to be looking at very different things. Can that be intermixed in the world of domains and other things? I don't know. That, I guess, theoretically that could happen, but would it make sense to combine those things?
I want to be clear. I'm not saying you should copy and I'm not saying you should actually use the same logs because the things won't chain up to the web PKI and logs won't accept you. I'm saying you should literally operate the same protocol and everyone can just staple the implementations and move on. And I don't understand what this document. I don't understand any deviation in this document is an opportunity to screw up. And so the fact that you're effectively redefining every component of CT and you made copies of it, how is it helping us?
Yeah, literally the wrapper, and maybe Rob can come in also.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I mean, I think I can comment on that. The advantage of building this as the ICT and the main difference between existing CT out there is that you usually build this on Trillion. And then you build the persona on top of that, and the persona can verify TN off list and reject certificates like delegate certificates or something that completely should not even make it through. So we can add that. But overall, we want to stick to the same protocol, have a binary compatibility and all that stuff, because all that work is already done. So a lot of implementation would be basically based on open source stuff with basically adjusting persona and then going to Trillion and maybe new version of Trillion that is just coming up soon. So,
well, right, but you have replicated the data structures, and so now, section 5.4 defines CT, defines NSCT, right? And so I don't understand like why you have a copy of this material in here.
Because we want to have a different persona, so we can verify different aspects of the certificate chain. Like we have TN off list, which regular CTs do not care about, and we want to reject that certificate or pre-certificate that is.
But the entire pre-certificate, I don't understand. The entire pre-certificate goes in the log. Every extension goes in there, and so like, I don't understand like why you can't use the exact same protocols and have and like
so the protocols are the same. What I'm saying is that the persona would be different, as in it would be different validation of certificate.
So I think
TLS certificate doesn't have TN off list, for example, in it.
So I think, Eric, I think we're actually on the same page conceptually. How we write the document and whether we repeat things or not repeat them probably is what we should have a discussion in the work.
No, I'm sorry. I don't think that we're on the same page, because I'm saying that if you cannot literally use an existing C2 log and the whole thing will just work, then things have gone badly wrong, and that means that any data structure that is in any PDU that is in 6962 that is replicated here, that is not a purely normative, that is not a purely informational thing, is a problem. And so, like, if you want to say operate the thing, but also check to do like operate an existing protocol compatible CT log, but also check this one thing for validity that you don't otherwise check, as part of your like anti-DOS measure in the CT log, that's fine. But if what you're saying is, no, I've actually taken all the data structures and copied them in here, that is bad. Because now you have a fork as opposed to a profile.
Yeah, the intent is not a fork at the level of the core CT spec.
Okay, but you replicate. But as I say, you've copied parts of the data structures, and so that's what you have is a fork.
Okay, well, we can remove that. This is not a done document. It hasn't even been agreed to become part of the working group. So I believe conceptually we agree, but
You just made the point I got in line to make, which is we need to understand this well enough to have a discussion about adoption. So let's make sure we understand the high level concept so we can do that. We can nitpick the details,
right,
if it's adopted.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Yeah, and so maybe we talked a little bit about this. Like, really, the big thing here is about the TN auth list extension and the ability to monitor those things specific to 8226 certificates versus different other certificates with the TN auth list extension. Now, I'm thinking the next thing I'm going to talk about is JWT clean constraints. Maybe there's part of that too that you could monitor as well. I think, as John stated, maybe there's other parts of transparency that we would love to put on top of this. But to be clear, those are things that are monitored, and we're not trying to change CT itself. I don't know if I need to go through all the details, but yeah, I will. So newly issued certificates are logged. For the STI ecosystem specifically, this may be limited to the ecosystem itself. That is a policy decision, but that would have to be discussed in that forum. Obviously, the CAs or SCAs that are defined for 8226 and delegate certificates would be the ones making the submissions. The monitors and the auditors would be decided by the ecosystem as well, whether it's general, all of the participants, whether these are roles that are specific to the governance of that ecosystem. Those things can be determined from a policy perspective. But those are aspects that we want to include in as part of this and keep as part of the general mechanism. We talked about a little bit about pre-certificates. So we believe that including the SET as part of the certificate is the best path forward. So we did limit it to only using that mechanism. That can be discussed. But if it's not part of the certificate itself, we would have to figure out a way to transport the SET somewhere, some other way. We considered, can you send it in passports or other things like that? But that just seemed like pretty disruptive if we can start from the beginning, just mandating the pre-certificates only. Any questions on that? Any concerns on that? I'll move forward. I'll just quickly go through this because this is all the same as certificate transparency. Nothing changed here using Merkle tree. Monitors that want to access the log need to request the log state. You get the signed tree head, and it can be used as something that that represents the commitment to the context of the contents of the log. So it's trusted. All of that stays the same. Nothing different for this document. But the whole premise is the log's immutable, trusted, not modified, can be monitored, auditing. The participants are the same. The only, in general, are the same. The thing we've made specific for STI-CT is that it's the STI-CAs or STI-SEAs that are submitting. We've also put something in that verification services, STIR verification services should check for the SETs. So that's something specific to this document. But monitor role, auditor role mostly stays about the same. Eric?
Yes. How do you expect relying parties to verify that the certificate was actually put in the log as opposed to SET was issued? This has been a huge problem in the web PKI, so it's like so this is not an idle question.
Can you repeat that question? Sorry, I'm having a little trouble hearing.
Sure. An SET is a promise to put the certificate into the log.
Right.
And in the web PKI, as a practical matter, that is what people check. They do not verify that it is in fact in the log. And so my question is, how do you expect, so Chrome does some stuff, but I don't think anybody else does. So how do you expect the relying party to verify that the this SET, the certificate was actually put in the log? Or do you not expect them to verify that?
Right. So the premise we put forward is that the verification service would inspect the certificate to see that the SET has been attached, and basically is relying on the fact that it's being monitored and audited. That
no, that doesn't work. I mean, I can go through the logic in extraordinary detail, but the bottom line is that that the entire immutability claim floating around here requires that the verification service actually check that the thing is in the log, not that it check, not that it rely on the monitoring and auditing services. So I mean, maybe I mean, and this is like a long debate going back to the beginning of CT, but like basically, if you don't do that, we have as a counter signature service, which I mean is what CT effectively kind of is right now. But I'm just like important to like update your priors about like how this actually works, which is that the what's supposed to happen here, the underlying premise of the prior is that everybody has the same view of what happened, right? And what connects that view is the Merkle head. And if all you do is check the SETs, then nothing stops the log from just signing things and never putting them in the tree. And no one can see that. And that's not visible unless you compare at the relying party point. The exchange of the tree heads. Now, like as I said, like the web kind of doesn't really do this, and the world has continued to spin. And so, like I'm not like I'm annoyed about the way it's being marketed, but that's fine. Or it's been marketed, but like it's important. Like when you sort of go back to saying it's immutable at the beginning, that's actually not correct unless you do this piece.
Yeah.
And so maybe we're just going to go do it, but
it'd be great to understand that, I guess, in more detail. I guess for the thing that we're trying to protect, which is the misissuance of SBCs and TNs. I wonder how much of a concern that is, but I'd love to understand the concern a little deeper. I don't know if there's a way to.
I just put a link in the chat, like 4,000 words about this, so that people can read on their own. So, but as I say, I don't think we have to change the protocol. I think maybe we're just not going to do this piece, but like it's important when you talk about it to be accurate what's going on. If you plan to do that piece, then you should say you're not going to do that piece.
Absolutely.
John?
Yeah, John Peterson. So yeah, I think, and this is maybe more of a meta comment above this. I mean, the degree to which we're going to end up prescribing in this IETF document the conditions under which these entries in the ledger are valid or invalid, right? And, I understand we're going to describe that there are roles for monitors and auditors, but what they're actually supposed to do and what relying parties are supposed to conclude on the basis of that might not be the IETF's job. I mean, just to give a concrete example, in a previous slide, you mentioned, let's make sure that if there are delegate certificates, for example, like, there's not 2 delegate certificates that are in the ledger that cover the same number. And like, I suspect that is not going to work, right? Like if we stipulated that as a policy, because there'll be things like because again, the notion of subordination is precisely that there is a delegation of control over the same resource across multiple entities in a chain.
Yeah.
And so, if there's a number range and we delegate a sub range of that, and then we delegate an individual number out of that, like all those are valid for the same number, right? Like this is an example of, but I could easily imagine even leaf certs for an individual number, cases in which having 2 different entities issue certificates for that is probably valid. And, it might not be valid in North American numbering plan, but there are other places where I might think that would be valid.
And I'm not saying that those conditions couldn't happen. I mean,
sure,
the same entity. Yeah.
Right. But I'm only bringing this up to say maybe, when we talk about monitors and auditors and we think about how to scope this as a work item for the working group to get adopted,
right,
let's focus on figuring out what we need to say about what's different from CT,
right,
and maybe figuring out what the least we can say about policy is that we can get away with here.
Absolutely.
And if like Addis or something wants to do something this later that is going to be much more strict about policy, let them do it.
Yes. Agreed. And some of the things I was saying was only to give color around what potentially could happen. I'm not suggesting that we set policies in this document. Alec?
We can't hear you, Alec.
Maybe that's working now. Should probably hit the unmute button.
Yep.
So I think it's less of a problem for the verification services, the relaying parties to verify the logs than it is in the web world, because the volume of verification service is, orders of magnitude smaller than a web browser, number of web browsers in the world. It is certainly, I completely understand what you're saying, and I don't think we want to go try to fundamentally change anything from CT to solve that problem. But it is far more realistic to have at least a large majority of verification services also serve the role as monitors. There would still independent roles in the document, but in a practical sense, parties being both is a far more realistic scenario than in the web world. So I agree it is a problem. And like you said, the world keeps working in the web, and I think it will keep working here, and it'll be far less of a problem here.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, so the issue with the web verification is actually not scale, it's privacy. It's that retrieving the STH leaks which certificates you're verifying. And so if you don't mind doing that, everything is fine. But for obvious reasons, we don't want the browsers to be retrieving the STHs and the entire, not actually the proofs, the inclusion proofs on the STHs for the specific certificates they're verifying. So if the verification service, you don't mind leaking that, then everything is great. And then you should say that they should do that. I mean, if you read the CT like specs are like full of a bunch of hand waving about how the certificates are going to, the clients are going to do this because no one can figure out how to do it with acceptable privacy and performance consequences. But if like the verification service can just like call up the CT log and say give me like a complete proof, then everything is fine, and you should encourage that. That would be a good thing to put in this document, which is very different from the web.
Robert?
So Robert Sparks with High Note Taker on. It's been a while since I've tried to take notes where Ecker and John were talking at each other. So I would like to ask if anyone in the room is wanting a point captured that they could refer to during the week this week for a conversation later this week to explicitly let me know they want it captured. I'll capture action items and decisions. Other than that, I'm going to go back and go through the recording next week and build out a summary of the discussion.
Okay, I think that's.
We're all friends.
That's right. That's right. Only technical disagreements. Everything else is fun. Okay.
What?
Alec, are you still in queue? Yes.
Yeah, I was just to Eric's point. I do think there's kind of two scenarios. Fortunately, one of them, I think there is no privacy concern on the shaken side, where you're verifying certificates with service provider codes in them. It's hard to see how that could be a significant privacy concern. On the stir side, where you're potentially leaking telephone numbers, that is more like the web world where that is a problem. So I think you have to be careful because this document's trying to cover both cases. But in the shaken world, it's hard to see how there's a privacy concern with a service provider leaking that they verified a certificate from another particular service provider, because there's no indication of the calling numbers or obviously the call lead numbers. It's very non-specific. So I do think that problem is really not much of a problem, again, specific to shaken.
Yeah, agree. I mean, it's a great point to bring up and note in the document. And if we want to address it or just have it as a security consideration, we can do that. But it's good to absolutely note that. I think the rest of the slides, I documented some of the APIs. Mostly, it's not because I wanted to go through them, but mostly just to correlate the submission, the verification, the auditing, and the monitoring parts. And, I think at the high level, interfacing to those things as part of those roles is pretty straightforward, beyond the complexity that is under the hood. I think that was the only point I had with that. Otherwise, Yeah. Oh, one note, we did have I forgot to take it out. Alec had actually brought this up. We had a note about role of the authentication service, but I think we wanted to take that out. We don't think the authentication service should be doing anything necessarily. So yeah, so are we having a party or? Any further discussion? Obviously, we would love to adopt this.
So I think we're about to talk about a possible adoption discussion. And without my chair hat, I wanted to ask a question about that, which is if we make the change that Ecker suggested and basically pare this down to something very small that is only saying this is what's different than plain vanilla CT and using all the protocol from CT, it seems to me that what we have left is policy. And when you're talking about STI policy, we're not the body for that. So is this still would this still be a stir draft, or is this something that IPNNI needs to do?
Well, I think we do want to detail the TNOF list dependencies. I also noted maybe JWT claim constraints could be part of that as well. Maybe future certificate related things if they ever come into scope. I think transparency in general, I do reference that in the VESPR discussion as well. So, so I think there's things to talk about. I do not intend to talk about specific policies other than perhaps the framework that policies can be decided or something like that. But I think there's enough to talk about in the document. But yes, we can make it a very referencing document rather than prescriptive from that perspective.
And to be clear, I didn't mean that to be stating an opinion. It was a neutral question, intended as a neutral question.
Right. It was taken as a neutral question.
But John Peterson, I think it's the right question. And indeed, I mean, the question to my mind is, can this document be informational? In the sense of what you're really saying is, we're going to use CT. Here are some ways that like CT is going to be used with STIR. We're not going to have any musts or even shoulds about the policy of what monitors, auditors, and relying parties are going to do for this, because we know that's going to be deferred to other entities in the ecosystem anyway. If we tried to tell them what to do, they would tell us to pound sand, right? And so, you know, can this be informational? I think it's worth doing as informational, by the way. Like, and I'm less convinced it's worth doing as PS, but like, I think having a document that says you could do this with STIR, and like, here's some stuff that like would help with that. Yeah, that could, I think it'd be meaningful in a number of environments.
I guess, yeah, I'm not totally rejecting that idea. Eric, do you have comments about that?
Yeah, I think I largely agree with John. In terms of an adoption call, I want to see a document that was structurally like with the document we plan to adopt, rather than a document like this and a promise to change it before we adopted it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, can do that.
Go ahead, Alec.
I was just going to say, I think I'm in complete agreement with what Eric you're saying about this is not intended to be a fork of CT. But I guess I would say I don't know that I would call it the exact same thing as CT in the web. It's really a bit of a subset, just in the sense, in a slight change in who the parties are. I mean, the CT RFC kind of is really written in the lens of TLS, like it's the TLS clients, not the verification service. And sure, you could kind of, you know, just say, yeah, where are the TLS clients? But they're not TLS clients. They're verification services. They're fundamentally doing the same things with regards to what CT is describing, but it's just really not the right description. The document talks about in the TLS handshake and TLS extensions. We don't have TLS here. I mean, obviously, you're probably using TLS through lots of other stuff with STIR, but not in this context. So it's kind of maybe a subset. It's got to be the pre-certificate, not something else, not TLS handshake. The verification service is a verification service, not a TLS client, as the document says. So there's some slight changes, and I don't know if that could still work if it's informational. And it's it's not really a technical problem. It's just more of a, I guess, procedural one. But it is a little different. Maybe a subset's the best way to describe it.
Yeah, glad you brought that up. I guess I would also question if we're saying only use pre-certificates, if that is something more normative or not. But go ahead, Eric.
Well, I mean, I think there are two issues. One issue is, as you say, you're profiling it. I don't think that's really a problem. I mean, like, obviously, if you're not doing TLS, there's nowhere that you can't put things in the TLS handshake. I think then there's sort of like the textual problem that this has been written in this sort of funny way where it just talks about TLS clients as opposed to, as you say, verifiers. I think a document which said use CT, but everywhere it says TLS client, write verifier. We get you pretty far, and I think that the EDs can figure out whether that had to be PS or informational. Like I say, I'm not fussed about the parts you don't use. They don't require changing; they require not doing. I mean, if in some future world there was like a TLS handshake that involved, I can't imagine how, store certificates, then I suppose you could put the things in there.
So as chair, I'll comment that we're almost halfway through our meeting period. So we need to wrap this. What I am hearing is that there's interest in pursuing this as an informational, but we're not ready to discuss adoption until we have another iteration of the document structured more like what we're talking about. Does anyone object to that conclusion?
I think as long as the comments that Alec made, regarding TLS and some of the more prescriptive things we want to say don't conflict with that conclusion.
Certainly, and I'll also remind people that we don't have to wait for Madrid to have another iteration and have a discussion.
Yeah, and I could absolutely work towards that as well. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next. Wrong button. Okay. So I think JWT claim constraints is
Yeah.
next. Okay.
And I'll try to be very quick on this one, unless we think it deserves a lot of discussion. So
You should have control now.
I do. Thank you. So really, I'm hoping this is very straightforward and simple. Probably something we should have done before. Maybe it's more relevant now from the perspective of delegate certificates that are going to use JWT claim constraints. In the ADIS shaken specs, we were not necessarily prescriptive on the use of authority tokens for challenges for ACME, for delegate certificates. But I think it might be a good thing to be more prescriptive on that, to set a model for subordinate CAs to use these mechanisms. Obviously, managing a bunch of delegate certificates benefits from the use of ACME and automated protocols. So really this is, and the way that I authored the current draft was to take the TN auth list and essentially do a lot of find and replace. It was more than that, but to use JWT claim constraints. I would plan on adding more context on how you would enumerate the JWT claim constraints and make sure they're known, and but it would end up being a JWT claim constraint ASN1 object, similar to the TN auth list object that would be returned.
Quick chair insertion real quick.
Yeah.
Do I understand correctly that you're targeting this draft for ACME and the discussion here is just for our information?
Yes, sorry, I should have premised that. I did that on the list, but yes, I'm going to present this in the Acme working group, but I did want to make sure it was people were aware of this. Obviously, there's more experts here that can help, provide better context around the use of it, and would like to get feedback from this working group. Obviously, that whether there's any disagreement, whether this is a good path forward as well. I think I probably have more information than necessary here, but basically new Acme identifier type, JWT claim constraint. It would correspond to the challenge in Acme that would be validated using the authority token that's passed. Pretty straightforward. If you understand how Acme works, you construct a CSR, you are presented with a challenge, you provide the token, authority token from whoever the authority is, and that again is maybe a policy question that we won't necessarily address with this, but it'd probably be somebody that's validating your ability to use certain claims or your ability to like with RCD, constrain the certificate to specific RCD values or things like that. And then you respond to the challenge, and if the challenge is, if the authority token is valid, then the CA can issue the certificate. Yeah, so I'm going to present this at Acme and looking for any feedback from this working group.
Good luck on the last bullet.
What's that?
Good luck on the last bullet.
More than usual.
Hi, John. Yeah, it seems fine. But we'll discuss more in Acme. I think obviously there's going to be a little bit of, this and that to it. But I think at a high level, we need this, and we will do it there.
Thank you.
+1.
Good. I'm getting +1s. That's great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Are you ready to move to the next presentation?
I am. Okay. So Vesper, we had a great discussion in Vancouver. Just to remind people and keep the James Bond theme going, Vesper is the martini. I don't know if I shared this with anybody, but this happened to be directly across the street from the venue in Vancouver, so I just have to take that as a sign. So Vesper, to remind everyone, verifiable STI persona, proposed as an extension to the STIR architecture, really about validation of claim information versus the telephone identity itself. So the claims that are being made about the entity behind the telephone number, things like that, sort of corresponding to the vetting and KYC conversations that we're having as an industry. Rich call data is probably one of the things people talk about most often, but any claims that may come in the future could be wrapped with this mechanism. I think there's as I discussed in the drafts, I think there's a transparency story here as well. The ability to make sure that, if I claim to be Home Depot, that somebody else doesn't claim similar things. Some of those mechanisms obviously need lots of discussion, but I think that's the high level idea here. So I will totally admit it. I put a lot in the initial Vesper draft. I used a lot of tools that are maybe somewhat on the newer side. So I really took that feedback. Selective disclosure, we got into large conversations about that. Zero knowledge proof, three-party security model, things that are all being worked on now, and understanding usage and security properties. But I think, sort of getting that feedback made me think about, like, how can we still maintain the same context and properties that we want from association of different claims to whoever is issuing the accountability for those, or the authorization of those claims, but use more familiar STIR constructs like JWT, digital signatures, hashes, things like that. And I think there is a path forward for that. I did not get a chance to document that and update the draft quite yet, but I do think there is path forward, and want to do that. So yeah, so I still think a lot of these concepts are important, and we should have good discussions about them in this forum. I would love to have that. But maybe if we deliver it in a better form, we may have a little more success. So yeah, so the trust model for claims, beyond just the telephone identity, there was the principle of making privacy enabled by default. But for those that want to publicly declare their assertions and make sure there's like a way that they can transparently say, like the Home Depot example I gave, that we can enable those things. Claim agents, the ones that take responsible for validating the claims, beyond the validation of the telephone identity itself, can happen via the digital signature, and the ability to transport that, perhaps via the passport, or whatever we discuss is the appropriate way to transport those things, can be also part of the principles that we include in the concepts of Vesper. Eric? So
you said Home Depot a number of times. I'm aware of where Home Depot is. I have as one nearby house. Give me a sense of what you think would appear in this PDU, however this PDU is carried, that says this is Home Depot. Would it be like literally the words Home Depot?
If they want to declare Home Depot publicly, so there's a number of issues there. One is, yes, it's transported as part of rich call data in plain text as Home Depot. So that's currently part of rich call data. This is how we validate and associate that assertion to somebody that was responsible for checking and validating that information was associated with the entity. So I do detail the ability to publicly assert or to hash the contents of that. So take a hash of the
Sure.
string Home Depot and associate that way.
Right. Just in the interest of time, I'm not talking about that part of it. Right.
Sorry.
I'm literally just talking about, no, my mistake for not being clearer. Like, so, I mean, this has been, I mean, this is a concept like this was part of the Web PKI for a long time. It's called extended validation certificates, right? Where you actually could put the company name in the certificate and it would display to the user. And like largely that's been abandoned in the web because because the information can't be trusted and nobody can check it. And because because actually there are like a zillion entities named Home Depot. And so all I have to do is start Home Depot Inc. in some other country, or in some other jurisdiction, and I can typically get like a certificate for it. And so maybe like people are cool with that, but I just want to say like this is like something that actually people tried in the web and it just didn't work very well at all. And so and there's nothing to do with any questions about like selective disclosure or hashing or any of those things. It's purely about like, can users meaningfully consume this information in a way that provides security?
Right.
And so so like, I guess my question is, do you have a better story for stopping me from registering Home Depot Inc. to sell homes instead of selling, for selling real estate instead of selling hardware, and getting that approved and then sending that on my phone calls?
I do not disagree that there's some challenges there, but that is something that we are that is being tackled in the ecosystem currently with branded calling and other things like that. So I think this is an effort to try to maybe formalize that some way in some interoperable specification.
Okay, so I mean, I guess I'll step off and let John talk in a second. But I think like I don't see it. Like, I don't obviously see a problem with like enhancing the claims that go in these things, and maybe they go in certificates, maybe they go somewhere else. I'm just saying that this particular form of claim is one that has been proven to be problematic in other settings, and so I want to make sure before we sort of like did an effort that was like largely targeted at that kind of claim, that we had a story about making sure that claims actually were valid and plausible in a useful way to the users before we like want to standardize them.
Yeah, and whether we tackle the specific problem of trying to talk about avoiding impersonation attacks where it's H0ME versus HOME, like that's probably not in scope for what we're going to do here, but at least provide the mechanisms to assert those things and associate them with somebody that should be vetting that information.
Sure. Just to be clear, I don't mean H0ME. I mean literally the same string, because like nothing stops. Like, it's perfectly legal for me to register Home Depot as a registered trademark, as a non-registered trademark for like a thing that wasn't in the hardware space, and that happens, and people do this, and like that's how it's like this is a major form of attack on NEV.
Yeah, like Apple Computer.
These demonstrations.
Right? This whole dispute with the Beatles over Apple Music, and the deal was that Apple could never be in the music business. And then, of course, iTunes came out and they had to radically renegotiate that. Yes.
Well, and
I just think about the trademark thing, but you can register, like certainly register the company name, which is what's the only thing that's required here.
I think we have a while to go to figure out what the policies are for declaring a calling name, and what the legalities are of like, I'm Home Depot and I'm Home Depot LLC, and are those two different businesses, or, those types of issues. So. But I don't think we should get into that necessarily.
Yeah, John Peterson. So I agree, this is super complicated, and it's super complicated for the PSTN and for phone calls, especially because there has been this legacy service. It's existed since time immemorial in our geological era anyway, called CNAM, that does precisely this, in the sense of when a telephone number comes in, there's a separately dipped service. You go consult, and it tells you what the appropriate calling name is associated with that. And you can really look at branded calling as just an iteration above that then beyond showing you the name, it shows you some other stuff. And RCD, as we specified it here, goes into call reasons and other metadata that you might want to be able to display to consumers to help them decide whether or not they feel like picking up the phone. But this is all Ecker, and this is the part that is, different, I think, from the Web PKI and from EV, is, there are the set of entities, and Chris has referred to vetters and has referred to KYC, which is short for Know Your Customer, who at least have embarked on a project to become trusted authorities who are the people basically that are holding the bag and on the hook if the representation is incorrect, right? And so if they vouch for something and said, this is actually Home Depot, and it's not Home Depot, like they're the people, that are accountable for that, right, is the way to look at it. And, this is still something that's shaking out in the ecosystem. And, it is going to take a while for the policies on that to really gel. But what I'm up here to say, and this comes back to something that's on one of Chris's previous slides, looking at the PKI side of this is interesting, because it's not that those fields don't all exist in PKI. These fields have all been specified. And, the question I come back to on this again and again is, okay, so what is it that you want? We don't have stuff in the PKI that can do, that requires us to have a separate token that is going to travel with the passport, with the call, with whatever, that we can't get from just baking this into the PKI itself. And I read the new use cases, and I'm still a little unclear on this. And so even beyond just what the policies will be, the places we stuff the data that the policies govern, I still don't understand what the slots are we don't have.
I think the primary thing is that the agents that vet the claims are typically not the service providers and others that are authoritative over the telephone numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I said irrespective of the policy, are the slots there? Is there a field in the cert, and whether that's EV or whether that's JWT claim constraints or it's anything else that we specified around all this?
Yeah.
Like, what's the code point, as we used to say back in the day, that is missing that this data needs to go into? Because the policy stuff is going to shake out in this completely messy way and not here at the IETF. Right.
Well, I think we can define the certificates that are used by the claim agent that signs the validation of the assertion, the claim. So
exactly.
I mean,
so what is the Vesper token for?
But that's different than an STI certificate, I think.
Well, I mean, again, the Vesper is different from an STI certificate too, right? Like a Vesper token is. And like
Yes,
the question, the point being though, we've already specified the certificates. Like we got a bunch of RCs about this stuff that have, as far as I can tell, all the fields we need to represent the data that this policy would inflict on, the calling ecosystem.
Right. So I think this also can be very simple from a mechanics point of view, that it's like some sort of token that gets signed or.
Well, why do we need a token that's signed? That's what I keep saying. Why is this not just the fields in the cert?
Or the passport.
Or the passport, but in this case, I think it's much more likely it's the cert.
Yeah, well, I guess that's, right. Do we want to define new extensions to certificates, or do we just want to define?
You're not hearing the question, so I think
Okay.
my proposal is all of those fields already exist in the certificates. We don't need to add any new ones. All we need to do is say we're going to use these to do this. Or at least I have not heard anything yet that I don't understand how to find a field in PKI that represents it.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. But you need to sign something, right?
The cert is what's signed. The cert, the way that certificate issuance works, there's like, a certificate authority, they like sign these certificates that they issue. Whether that's SCA doing it for a leaf cert, for an individual telephone number that would have all the properties that you want for a free phone and things like that. Like that all just works, right?
Well, we use 8226 certs to sign passports, right? Because of the association of either the service provider code or the telephone number to the entity. The one that's validating the one that's validating the claims, the vetter, for just to use that term, how do they represent themselves in the payload of what we're presenting? So I think it needs to be a signed something.
Yeah, with a
cert that I agree can use existing ways of identifying the subject of the certificate.
We'll just stop. I want to let Ecker get in and Ben as well. But again, I think the point I'm trying to make is just I'm not seeing the need to create a third entity here. There's the cert, there's the passport, and now there's this Vesper token. Whatever the fields are, the code points, that Vesper token, I believe we can find existing homes for them without specifying something new.
Don't sit down, John, because I think we're talking about the same thing. Like forgetting about the code points for a second, let's just talk about the trust model. I think is perhaps a place to start with this conversation, right? So we have an existing trust model whose job it is to validate that a given caller is entitled to use a given phone number in their call, right? And those people are and what we'd like to have is have at the same time it appear and say like this is as Chris says Home Depot as opposed to 5551212, right? And so I guess maybe the first question is the entity who validates that I'm entitled to use this phone number the same as the entity who validates that I'm entitled to use this this name or this other identifying mark of any kind. And that's the first question I think we want to establish. So the same people or different people?
No. It can be, but not always.
But the point is that is not the kind of policy the IETF is going to decide. In other words, that'll be different in different nation states that use this for a variety of reasons.
Right.
Like the way this will work in Brazil for the 0303 and 0304 numbers, which are
Right.
their commercial numbers that they want to originate from, work differently than the way it does for enterprises in the US.
Right.
And we can't stipulate that in the IETF. All we can do
can't.
is stipulate the code points.
Well,
Right.
so I guess,
But,
sorry, go
but I just want to validate that there is a need for that, right? Because there is a separation of the vendor versus the service provider that is validating the telephone number used for STIR.
right. So I guess what I'm trying to guys is if those are the same people, then obviously, as John says, this can just go on one credential. If they are different people, then somehow we have to figure out how to hoist the validation decision made by party A of the mark into the credential asserted by party B of the phone number binding, and somehow those have to be connected, right? And
Right.
that doesn't tell you they have to be in different tokens. It just tells you that you have to hoist that in there somewhere, right? And maybe the answer is in fact that like one trusts the other and just happens out of band, or maybe the answer is they're not independently trusted. That has to be exposed all the way down to the user. But I think those are the questions that we have to like reflect in the architecture here. Is what are those entities? And if I just make, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so the short answer is we have tools that work either way. So for example, third-party RCD, which is something specified in RCD, right, has the concept that there's an IS, a separate issuer, like a vetter, who went through and said, for this telephone number, this is Home Depot should be displayed. This is the logo of Home Depot that should be displayed. And as a relying party, you decide, do I trust the entity that generated that third-party thing? Do I think they're reliable as a vetter? And if I do, then I display their shit. And if not, I don't, right? Like that. But there's also a model where a carrier, for example, has an SPC and can delegate a certificate for an individual number down to an entity, and they enforce on it because they have a business relationship and contracts and everything with that entity, and they say, you're the guy that does it. We have the tools to do this either way. We cannot stipulate what the policy is going to be for any particular deployment. Our job is to make the tool here at the IETF, which we have. We made that tool. It works.
The reason I use the word token is because to me, an entity wants the ability to assert that they're Home Depot, or that they want their calling name to be Home Depot, and they have the legit right to use that string as part of something that can be taken. They might want to apply that to multiple numbers. They might want to apply that across different service providers.
To their SCA,
they might want to apply that across multiple branded calling ecosystems. Whatever it is, that should be separable, but attachable to a passport or whatever mechanism we decide. I'm not.
Which it is either way. It's, again, either using third party like RCD as I described, or using subordinate certificates that is achievable through either of those ways. We don't need. I don't understand the need for a third entity that's another token they're adding to this that does the same thing as either of those two mechanisms do. If we say people aren't doing this and they should do, we want them to do this, because it's not, the problem is not that the protocol capability is missing. The problem is all the policy messiness that is preventing this from happening.
I would need to understand how you think that's, because to me, STIR has always been about the telephone number and the association with the identity header and passport and all that other stuff.
Until we created RCD, and then suddenly all that changed. And now it's just an arbitrary set of fields that we add about whatever information we want.
The current construct we have is that RCD is a claim that's inserted and validated by either the service provider or whatever. And that is not the same mechanism as another party that is.
But third party RCD is though. Right.
But there's no cryptographic assurance.
Of course there is. The third party signs it. Like, I mean, again, we both wrote this document, right? What the document says is a third party can generate a passport that is, has this IS in it that indicates who they are as a veteran and whether you should trust them. They sign this entity themselves. It's not tied to the call itself. It's a supplemental passport that you add the same way you're talking about adding a Vesper token that's going to accompany the passport.
Yeah, but
what this thing has
signing?
Is they do. The veteran does. That's how the third-party RCD thing works.
I don't think it works. No, it doesn't.
Well, it's supposed to. The things I wrote say that. If they don't say that anymore, we need to go back and look at it.
Because the signature is by either the calling party that's using the delegate certificate so there's no cryptographic.
It's not a delegate certificate. That's separate. That works differently. I agree than third-party RCD does.
I'm concerned with what we're trying to accomplish with this conversation.
So what
Yeah.
we're trying to accomplish this conversation is, again, getting down to, as we're talking about what the Vesper use cases show us and what the needs are for a trust model like this for claims beyond telephone identity, I'm asking, is there actually a need for any new code points, or do we indeed have those code points already that we can apply to, that were indeed designed to do exactly this? Like,
Okay.
I mean,
Well, then
this is the
maybe we
part that
need
I
to-
don't understand.
No, I understand that part of what you're asking. What I don't understand is how are we getting to a document that we're either going to make a call for adoption or decide not to
Well, okay.
do that.
So let's go to the,
Eric, did you have
Next
something more?
page.
Sorry, we've been just free-forming it.
so we discussed last time,
The-
potentially working on a use case document. I could do that. I actually created something, although I wouldn't recommend necessarily reading it. I didn't put as much effort into it as I would like to admit. Or I could just keep working on the core Vesper document, depending on what the working group thinks I should do. But we also talked about, can this move forward without potential charter additions or changes? So I guess I need guidance there on,
So I think we can talk about charter issues kind of in parallel.
Right.
But what I'm hearing as far as understanding the trust model, this to me sounds like one of these things where you and John and Ecker need a side discussion.
Sure.
Because it's getting a little bit too detailed to cover, and with microphone lines, I think, unless people
Right.
think otherwise.
But the use case with trust models seems to be the thing people are not coalescing around.
And all the technical stuff doesn't matter if we don't have that.
okay.
Sorry, I didn't add myself to the queue. My name is David Rogers, so I'm the outgoing fraud and security group chair at the GSMA. I just wanted to make a comment that I think the core reasons around stir shaken in terms of the issues that we're seeing in the market and why it's not being adopted elsewhere is because of CLI spoofing, basically, right?
Mhm.
And so where you extend that trust to enterprises by signing some information, some additional information, you still have that core issue, which is you can't gain trust automatically, and that fraudsters will deliberately try to undermine that. Similar issue with RCS actually as well. Just wanted to get that on record. It's not a technological issue. It's a pure fraud and human issue.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to open that red hole in this room, but okay, noted. Okay, I'm okay with that path forward, and we'll keep plugging forward.
Okay. Next
That's all you had,
presenter.
right? Okay, so. Feng, are you in the room?
Is he in the room at all?
I don't see him in the.
I don't see him in the participant list. Pull up the agenda again.
So the reason I keep making unhappy noises is the buttons that you use to operate everything are in the same zone on the iPad that make my window go away. So back to our agenda real quick.
More. Is Hal here?
Is Feng Hao with us? You're here.
Ah,
Okay, good.
there he is.
Okay. Hang on, let me switch to your slides then. Give me just a minute. I don't know if I hit the right button and it took control away from me.
So It's waiting for the slides.
Yeah, I think you took control from me when you gave it.
I was only doing the clicker.
Okay, I'm gonna have to, can you have to undo the
I can do that.
clicker? Let me have control.
You got
And now the clicker.
it. There you
Okay.
go. We have 15 minutes.
15 minutes? Yeah, sure. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Feng Hao from University of Warwick. So I'm very happy to be here and talk about caller ID verification. So the problem we want to address is caller ID spoofing. This is a big problem now. So attacker can absolutely change caller ID, and that is the basis of many social engineering attacks. So we know that there's already a solution called Stern Shaken. The idea is to have a digital signature to every phone call, and also as part of the content of the signature, it also includes caller ID. So this solution has been mandated in the US for the past 4 or 5 years. The obvious question is that, do we need another solution? So a little bit.
I'm sorry. I hate to interrupt you. I just want to give a little context for everyone in the room that I assume most people have actually followed this in the list, but this started out, I think, on the art list or dispatch, I can't remember which. And there was discussions that sent it here because this group is the expert on caller ID authentication. So when we have the discussion in this room, we should think of it kind of like we were dispatching, along the lines of, is this work that this group should work on? Not necessarily is every technical detail correct now, but is it a direction that this group should work on? And if the answer is yes, then we would talk about how to continue. If the answer is no, then we would think about, is there another place the work should be done, if it should be done at all?
Yeah.
So we're not dispatch. We don't make dispatch decisions, but we need to kind of think like we were dispatched for this.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Thanks, Ben, for the clarification. So for Shaken, it has a digital signature. You verify the signature and check that whether signature is correct. But also there's a content begin signed. And by the induction, then it's presumed that everything signed is also genuine and that is accepted by the terminating by the receiver. But for digital signature, it's very crucial that the security of digital signature depends on the key management, because ultimately it's the management of the private key. So in the worst case, if the private key is lost, apparently you can impersonate the holder of this private key. But in this case, the attacker can actually do something more. If the private key is lost, attacker can not only impersonate carrier, but attacker can also impersonate any caller ID to any telephone number, because of the trust assumptions made in this solution. So what this shows is that this use of signature doesn't really authenticate the caller ID in real time. So when the phone rings, you have this caller ID. There's no validation in real time whether this is genuine or not. So currently, that is a solution I think is missing, and that is motivation. John.
Yeah, that last line, we don't have a solution on this, is not referring to what happens here. It's referring to what happens in Addis at Shaken. And even their characterization of Shaken here, I don't think is actually accurate in a number of respects. Like, not all signed content is automatically accepted as genuine, right? I mean, there are levels of attestation, and there are policy decisions that are made on the basis of those. And even beyond that, even things with the attestation, there are innumerable policy decisions that are made to determine whether or not content is actually accepted as genuine. And so you're attacking a straw man of a protocol we don't define here, that does not have any of these properties.
Yeah.
Why are we talking about this?
I think as Ben explained
yes,
earlier,
actually we are dispatching.
It's for the discussion because we have experts here. And the problem we want to address here is validation of caller ID in real time. So that is the solution to this problem is missing, whether people think—
It's not missing here. It's missing in Shaken. We have a solution that authenticates caller ID in real time. We have the ability to sign with certificates that contain telephone numbers that can be compared by verification services in order to ascertain whether or not they have the authority to sign for the number, period. This has nothing to do with what the IETF does.
Okay, point taken. I'm glad that you agree there's a missing solution. to this
Yeah, but
problem.
not here. Go to Addis and yell at them. There is not a missing solution here. We have a solution that does this here.
Okay, I'm explaining the background. What we are proposing here is a solution to validate caller ID.
Yeah, we have one that works in real time, just like this.
It does.
I don't understand why you are here talking to us about this.
Sorry,
I'm
To,
just- I'm just-
to insert something as chair, everyone probably does understand this. Shaken is a framework that uses STIR. Shaken, the comments that you're making are referring to Shaken. That is controlled by the Addis IP&I working group. STIR is a more general solution. It's not widely deployed this way, but it could be more generally used to sign a lot more information and be much more real time. So there's nothing in STIR prevents that usage. It's just not what the IP&I, Addis IP&I chose to do with it.
Restating, STIR absolutely can do real-time verification. That was one of the requirements that we accepted when we started this work, and it is provably part of that protocol already.
how does STIR do the real-time validation of caller ID? Oh,
So in real time, when a call arrives to verification service, it has a passport attached to the call, right? And that passport is signed by a particular certificate. And the call will have a calling party number that usually appears in the front header field, sometimes in other fields, depending on your jurisdiction. But like what you do is you look in the certificate at this field that's called TN off list. And the TN off list field can contain, for example, a single telephone number. And that telephone number's validity, right, is determined by the entity that issues a certificate. And those entities are imperfect, as all entities are, right? But like you compare at the verification service, the originating number that's in the front header field to the set of numbers, which may be just one, that are in the TN off list of the certificate, and in real time, make a decision. Is the entity that signed for this call allowed to send calls for that number or not? That is how STIR was designed to work. And in 2015, just to go back into history, when Shaken started, a compromise was made, right, by people that are not in this room. Well, I guess two of the people are in this room. But like a compromise was made at the FCC, literally of the United States, like in rooms there, to allow a system where you would have these like service provider codes that would be issued and all the things that Shaken does, right? And like that has nothing to do with what we specify here. That compromise does not. Like, I mean, what part, do you understand why I say that is a real-time authentication system for this? And that validation is accurate in real time?
I think we can take that part of discussion offline. What happens now is that in a lot of cases, even the signature is valid, but the call ID is actually illegally spoofed.
Yeah,
So
in
there have been
Shaken.
quite a few
No, but do you
cases.
understand what I said about the use case in STIR, where there is a single telephone number in a certificate, and it corresponds to the from header field or doesn't? And so if you put like a different number in, and it doesn't correspond to the number there, you block the call. That is how STIR was designed to work.
Okay, so
Do you agree that that is authenticating the caller ID in real time, or do you mean something else by authenticating the caller in real time?
but also we have two types of spoofing here. So there's also legal spoofing.
Of course, and that
Yeah,
certificate
you could
contain-
change. You could change
That
the phone number.
certificate could be issued to a doctor and be on his mobile phone, and wherever he goes, it allows him to use the front main number of his hospital, right? That is the way that STIR works.
The question is, how do you distinguish legitimate and illegitimate spoofing?
By whether or not the number that is being asserted in this call is under the authority of the certificate signing for it or not. And in Shaken, you cannot do that. And in fact, it's an anti-requirement in Shaken. Like there are people who like will not let you go do that in Shaken for reasons I'm not going to get into here. It doesn't change the fact that stir just has a black and white binary decision that you can make this with. Now, there's a lot of people in queue, and I'm going to stop ranting, but like the point is, do we need another solution? The reasons that are listed here for another solution have nothing to do with the work that we do here in the IETF.
Eric?
Yeah, I feel like I'm maybe not following like the objection you're raising here. So let's like talk not about the telephony network, but about the web. My favorite topic. So on the web, if the CA signature private key is lost, you agree we have a disaster, and like anyone can, and an attacker can sign anything, right? And that's of course true of stir as well. And if if you use if you have a large CDN which covers big fractions of the internet, and they lose their private key material. Now, that's probably one key for each domain, but they're all stored in the same, so they're all stored in the same thing. Then they can impersonate any of their customers, right? And these are properties of the Web PKI. And so, in what way is this worse than the Web PKI, other than that the scope of that compromise is not like every customer of the CDN, but every person in the country? Would you say the Web PKI does not provide real-time verification of domain names?
Sorry, Eric, I didn't completely catch your question. Are you? Sorry.
My question is, how is the set of complaints you've offered here different from the state of the Web PKI?
How does Shaken signature offer the real-time validation of the caller ID?
No, I'm saying you have a set of complaints about how it does not offer real-time validation of the caller ID. And I'm saying, do you think that the Web PKI offers real-time validation of the domain name?
For the Shaken, basically what the certificate offers is that.
No, I'm not asking at Shaken. I'm asking at the Web PKI because I'm trying to understand your position. Do you think the Web PKI offers real-time validation of the domain name?
Yes, for the PKI, what it validates is that this is identity of the carrier. That's all.
Again, I'm not asking about Shaken. I'm asking about the web because I'm trying to understand whether your complaints are more broadly applicable. Does the Web PKI offer real-time validation of the domain name of the server?
For the Web PKI, yes, you can provide real-time validation of the website.
How is that different from here? Because in the Web PKI, if either the CA key is compromised or a CDN key is compromised, as a practical matter, that compromises a huge swath of domain names.
For the skill Shaken, I think there are many experts here. Basically, when you have the certificate and the signature received by the terminating carrier only checks that whether the signature is correct, and as it assumes everything signed by the signature is genuine. It's an assumption. If something is wrong, and the data signed turns out to be fake, and that has happened in the real world, then there's another mechanism to do the punishment.
Okay, sorry, quick interruption. We've got 2 minutes left. We have a few more people in queue. Can we let Alex and Chris at least have a minute to say whatever they wanted to say?
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm not saying that this isn't something to look at, but I think we have to be very careful. We're kind of making some very false statements about Shaken. And on one hand, it's correct. You're right. The whole point of Shaken is about identifying who the OSP is, but the notion that you're just trusting everything is just not how it works. So the point of Shaken is to allow in real time the terminating service provider to know who the OSP is. And if you know who the OSP is confidently, and you know that they have a history of making unwanted calls, then you might be able to think that, oh, the next call they make is more likely to be unwanted, and the inverse. It's nothing to do with the calling number. You're right, it's not signed, and that's not the point. There's a huge percentage of illegal calls that are seen that are not involving spoofing. And a solution like the one you've proposed makes no attempt at solving that problem, right? If someone goes and buys 10,000 numbers and uses each one once and makes an illegal call with each one once, but they weren't spoofed, they've just committed tons of fraudulent calls, and this would do nothing. But with Shaken, if you see an OSP is making lots of unwanted calls, future calls from that OSP can have different policy decisions defined. So, I mean, I completely agree. Shaken does not authenticate the calling number, but that's not what it's trying to do. So I think kind of we need to stop talking about Shaken. You're trying to solve a different problem, and that's fine. But the comparisons to Shaken are they're just leading to a lot of wrong information, and they're not relevant. Let's just focus on what we're trying to do here, which is provide a mechanism for the call ed party to confirm that the calling party number, the person, if you send a call in the opposite direction, that it's the same party who's making it, which maybe is a good thing in some cases, maybe it's a bad thing. But let's just stop the comparisons to Shaken because they're not relevant. Kind of to John's point.
Okay,
Yeah,
we're out of time. Chris, we'll give you a minute, then we're going to shut this
And
down.
I think Ori has something to say too, so we need to really.
Yeah, I'll just be quick. One is, well, I agree with everything that was said, and I haven't seen any evidence on the list that there's been any support for this, but just to correct the record, ADIS does have specs that 92, 93, 94 that deal with delegate certificates, rich call data. So we are working on that too.
Good. Hi, I'm Ori Steele. I'm responsible AD here. I just want to, thank you all for working group topics today, and I wanted to thank Robert Sparks for being one of our 3 chairs for this working group for some time now. We've recently removed him from the data tracker. He's free to continue to take notes for us and attend the calls. And thank you again for all of your work supporting the STIR working group. And thank you to our chairs for running today's session.
With that, we're adjourned. Thank you.
So we see you tried.
Yeah.
As